Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to the channel. Now in my last video I had talked about my all-time favourite scenario from Wing Leader Victories 1940 to 1942. Now I'm going to talk about the very next scenario in the book, which is the bridges at Sedan. Now, unlike the one we looked at before, I am not so fond of this one. And it's not because it's in any way a badly crafted scenario. It's more that I'm trying to work out how on earth you're supposed to achieve anything as the British player. Now, it is possible. And if I get close to the victory conditions, you'll see that they are actually quite generously tilted to give the British a chance to win. But I suppose it's a tribute to the creation of this scenario that and the work that was put into it, that it is a very accurate depiction of the hideous, hideous day the RAF had on the 14th of May 1940, where everything seemed to go right for the Luftwaffe for the most part, and everything seemed to go wrong for the RAF. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the scenario and why that is, and also to just ponder some thoughts as to how the British can do better. Now, there are various things stacked against them. Let's first of all look at the pilot quality. Now, the skills of the bomber crews on both sides are fairly balanced, but if I look at the Luftwaffe setup first, yes, I am setting this up because I intend to play it through again and see if I can do any better, but I think a lot of experimentation is going to have to be had. It's easy to spot the German fighter squadrons there, and there. And as you can see, every single one of them has a hefty dollop of veterans, and 3 of the 4 have expert pilots, which is really good. Another advantage they have is that they have tactical flexibility, which means that in the heat of combat they can split their squadrons into flights, which is really useful. And also, they have, of course, the Germans had a highly evolved combat doctrine right from the start of the war. Let's compare them to their RAF opposite numbers. So here we have the British fighters and bombers, and again, the British, like their German counterparts, it's easy to spot the British fighters. You'll notice that every single British fighter squadron is marked with rigid doctrine. And that is accurate for the time, but it does give the British some penalties in combat. The other issue is the quality of the pilots. 2 of the 3 British fighter squadrons have veteran pilots, which is not a bad thing. There isn't an expert in sight. And attention should also be paid to their starting missions. So if I return briefly to the Luftwaffe, we have a mix of escort, combat air patrol, and intercept, which gives them a good balance, actually, a good mix. All of the British fighter squadrons are on sweep. Now, sweep missions do have their advantages, but when you're trying to shepherd bombers, the temptation when you're on sweep is to just forge off and look for trouble. The other problem is the British don't start in an escort role, so whereas tactically flexible or otherwise squadrons that start off as escorts can change their status to sweep when they intercept and then reform on the bombers they're supposed to be protecting. Fighters that start on a sweep mission are unable to do that. So that's the initial set of problems the British have vis-a-vis their German opposite numbers. Now I'm just going to bring the camera around because we've talked about pilots. I'd like to go through aircraft now. I won't go into too much detail as to what's happening on the map, but basically one of the things that makes this mission very unique, I can see why they put it in, is that you have this weird occurrence where both sides are trying to bomb targets in the same general area. So for the Germans, the attacking British trying to move into Sedan and stop their bridgehead, those are the targets for the Luftwaffe. And conversely, the British earnestly desire to bomb that bridge. And it's not going to end well for somebody, or perhaps both. But anyway, as I say, last time I played this, it did not end well for the British at all. In fact, despite me trying to do something a bit different, all I ended up doing was reenacting the historical battle. So you can imagine how that went for me. But let's just look at the aircraft. So, the premier fighters on both sides. The British bring the Hawker Hurricane Mark 1 to the party. The German card is for the Bf 109E4. However, the scenario rules remind us that we are actually using the 109E1. So it's not quite as powerful as that card makes out. You do have to reduce its firepower to 0 and its protection to 3. Which is not too bad. I mean, it brings its protection down to something inferior to the Hurricane, and also its firepower is not quite up to scratch. But in other respects, it does have something of an edge. The two fighters are equal in turning, but the Bf 109 does have an advantage in speed. And again, there are more of them, so that rather balances out. Now, where the Germans really shine is in the quality of their bombers. The Stuka, of course, is no great shakes, as you can see from the figures, in a fight with British fighters, but it has a much higher chance of survival than the British bombers do. So, I mean, it's not to say that the British bombers are terrible, but they're not as well escorted. You see, the Fairy Battle actually compares reasonably well to a Stuka, but then when you stick it next to one of these, even with the reduced firepower and protection, that suddenly looks very, very threatening. The British also bring the Blenheim along, which is again not a bad bomber, certainly not bad for a 1940s scenario, but could be better really. And it is the earlier model of Blenheim, I believe, that we are using in. Yes, it is. It is the Blenheim Mark 1. So reduced protection, which is not very good news for the Blenheim. So the two sides are comparable in terms of numbers, but the Germans have an edge in numbers of fighters, and their quality overall is marginally, very marginally better in terms of machines, significantly better in terms of the human factor. And they bring an equivalent number of bombers, but every single one of the German tactical bombers is the Junkers Stuka. The British have this very awkward mix of Blenheims and battles, which tactically creates a problem because they come in separate waves, that is true, but you do get a point in the game where both types, at least I found earlier in this scenario, where both types will be on the board together. And so you see you start with your Blenheims there at rather terrifyingly low altitude, it must be said, because the German fighters, they're escorting the Stukas, they're on a anti-aircraft sweep, so and everyone's below the cloud level, so in a couple of turns those bombers can't deviate their course, they're going to be sighted by that thing. The sweeping British fighters are really badly positioned at the outset, and things don't really improve. So as I say, this scenario is really, really well worked out in terms of how things looked for the British historically, and how things looked for the Luftwaffe. The question is, who will prevail this time? Can I come up with anything better? And if nobody minds, I'd like to again throw the question open to you, dear viewers. Have any of you played this scenario before? Did you find you had a easy time winning as the British? Did you come up with some amazing strategy? Or, if you don't mind me asking the question, did you horrifically fluff it as the Germans and not do very well? I would be very interested to hear from you. What I'm going to try to do this time, what I failed to do last time, is try to use my fighters a bit more sensibly in a bomber defense role. I don't think I did that so well the last time, and that was my main undoing. It sounds obvious in retrospect, but it's the kind of mistake you can make fairly easily in this game. But if you have played this scenario, if you like it, please do let me know. And I would be interested to hear if any of you have ever achieved a decisive British victory in this one, or whether you just find the Germans are quite difficult to play for all their advantages. Above all, hope you're all enjoying this game, those of you who play it. If any of you out there have yet to try it, I really, really recommend it. It is a wonderful simulation of air combat at flight and squadron level. And if you look at my earlier videos, you'll understand why I think it's a very refreshing view on the simulation of air combat in World War II. But I'll leave that there. I will try and let you know how the battle goes, whether the day goes well. And if I have enough data and it's not too embarrassing, the outcome, I will throw together an after action report. In the meantime, thank you for your company. And above all, happy gaming, happy flying, and thank you for visiting the channel.